And joining me now is Talk Media News UN correspondent Luke Vargas. Luke, welcome.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining me today. So obviously the first thing on the foreign affairs beat is what's happening with Korea, the spectacular, probably maybe even seminal moment, at least to this point, thing that's ever happened with the Trump administration, and that was the return of the 3 hostages the other day.
Yes, I actually just booked my ticket to Singapore as well, so I'll be going out to Asia next month for this big hair summit, as they're calling it. There's a lot to watch, and I have been sort of reading the tea leaves, if you will, this week, and I think there are a few pretty key dynamics that we should be paying attention to that sort of bubble a little bit below the surface of the prisoner release story. One, I think we talked about on Tuesday, which is this meeting between Kim Jong-un and the Chinese president earlier this week, in which North Korea, essentially with China's blessing, said our posture going into the meeting with Trump is to pursue phased and synchronous denuclearization. Phased meaning that they maybe wouldn't offer up everything all at once, that they would set out, checkpoints throughout multiple years, and synchronous, implying that they would do a little, the U.S. might ease up sanctions a little and back and forth. And both of those things are things that the Trump administration has said they specifically don't want. They want big near-term nuclearization, a big pledge that could somehow be fit into the president's first term, and that they don't want to be doing a little denuclearization in exchange for a little sanctions relief. So the fact that North Korea is sort of saying that's our plan should be ringing some alarm bells, I think, in Washington about where Kim's mindset is going into the talks. And the other one is some leaked Chinese import data from the northeastern provinces that was published on Weibo, Chinese social media over the past 24 hours, and this sort of since disappeared. But it confirms some reports we've been getting that Chinese imports from North Korea have started to pick up again in recent weeks after basically coming to a halt in January and February, which in turn was right around the time, several weeks after that, where North Korea says, okay, what about face-to-face talks with the United States? Now that there is momentum, now that Kim is starting to come back to China and they're less worried about him, he's like becoming friends with Xi Jinping, China is starting to import again, essentially lowering the maximum pressure that used to be building towards North Korea. And you put this all together, and I was reading a really good think piece on this today, which basically suggests that the maximum pressure campaign is going to be very difficult to sort of present to Kim anymore with a straight face, because there's the South Koreans obviously don't want that. The South Korean public now is all in favor of engagement, in favor of family reunions, in terms of possibly ending the Korean War. The Chinese, it seems like, who were called in to provide the muscle on behalf of the United States in terms of really making it hurt for North Korea economically, maybe easing up a little bit. And you put that all together and then add in the fact that the prisoners have been released. It's sort of, I think we might expect to see Trump in this landscape do something to try and saber rattle, to try and remind him of to remind Kim Jong-un of the consequences of failing to come to sort of any agreement in Singapore. But I do think U.S. leverage has slipped a little bit, and Trump may feel the need to reassert kind of the punishments that he was amping up so much in recent months.
You talk about the United States involvement, of course, which is seminal to all this. And today, Secretary of State Pompeo said, look, if they actually dismantle their nuclear program, and there are some indications from some satellite imagery that they have leveled some of the buildings where this development was taking place, the United States will actually give them an infusion of cash.
Right. From which some future administration will play footage of, when they say, hey, we gave the North Koreans cash. I don't know that. I joke. It just seems like a funny statement to make. I will only caution that I believe it was in like 2007. The North Koreans blew up a cooling tower, and they had journalists there to photograph it. And then we found out only months later they had shifted that facility elsewhere and were continuing with their activity. I don't know. I don't feel like it's completely necessary to be the cynical voice in all these talks. The cynicism, I think, is probably quite widely shared. But it does seem like at this point Kim Jong-un might be able to sort of put the brakes on things a little bit and wait out Trump to a certain extent if indeed he has gotten the assurances that some people think he may have gotten from the Chinese this week, which suggests, hey, maybe they're not going to be quite as isolated, just so long as Kim Jong-un maybe doesn't even denuclearize, but stops doing testing, stops doing certain ballistic missile tests, and starts to integrate more into the Asian political landscape. That might be enough for the Chinese to sort of dial the pressure down to a place where the North Koreans are once again comfortable.
So the other big story that we have to talk to Luke Vargas at the Talk Media News, the UN correspondent, about, of course, is what's going on in the Middle East and the reaction to the president's decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. And things have heated up. There are missiles that are flying into the Golan from Syrian territory that the United States and Israel says are the result of Iranian soldiers who are on the ground and surrogates, Hezbollah, responsible for this. But the Syrian government is now claiming responsibility as well, which may not be helpful to whatever case the United States and Israel is trying to build against Iran. Do you have any sense of what the real deal is?
There is one key anecdote in this whole sort of, I could say it's almost a 3 or 4 country crisis that's occurring in that Golan, southwestern Syria region, which is the Times of Israel reporting that Israel called up the Russian Foreign Ministry on Wednesday, several hours before Israeli artillery hit these Quds Force positions within Syria, and basically said, hey, Russia, phone up the Iranians and tell them that if there are any attacks incoming to Syria, we're going to just obliterate these troops. And Russia called the Iranians, and the Iranian political leaders basically got the message that, hey, Russia wants to preserve the Iranian nuclear deal. Rouhani, presumably the administration that answered the phone in Iran, also wants to preserve the nuclear deal. And they realized that if this attack occurred, and Israel has some grounds to cite a major threat to their territory and loss of life within Israel, it does play into this notion that Iran cannot be trusted, that they're a menace to the entire region, and nevertheless, the attack occurred. And this comes back to something I was talking about on Tuesday with you. And again, I'm in no way have the monopoly on this opinion. It's, I think, very widely shared, which is that we are seeing competing factions within Iran pursuing very different strategies in the wake of the Iran nuclear deal collapse. One of them being on the political side to try and act conciliatory, to try and say all the right things about being open to renegotiating with the Europeans, not resuming enrichment just because the U.S. has left the agreement. And then on the other side, the Revolutionary Guard force, the hardliners within Iran, of which the Quds Force is a subsidiary organ, basically trying to use perhaps an attack on Israel and the ensuing crisis that erupts as a way of saying, hey, we need now military leadership in Iran to steer through these tumultuous times, and at least to sideline Rouhani and tear up the nuclear deal. So that was a very telling anecdote that the Israelis and the Russians are aware of this as well. But also, as you mentioned, the U.S. and Israel still claiming precisely that this the menace that Iran is causing in the region is why we shouldn't have had that nuclear deal in the first place. So I think it's safe to say, and I guess I'll cut myself off, but the final anecdote there being the Saudis also saying this week, hey, if Iran goes back to building a nuclear weapon, we're going to just develop a nuclear program, which they could do, unlike the Iranians, overnight, basically. I mean, the U.S. could fly in nuclear warheads to Saudi Arabia at an hour's notice, essentially, and they have a lot of the equipment there to be able to host those kind of weapons. I think it'd be safe to say a lot of different parties who have been looking for some chaos to be able to take a bite out of whatever policies that are already embedded in are using this post-U.S. pullout from the nuclear deal environment to do exactly that, be it the Iranians, the Revolutionary Guard, the Israelis, or even the Saudis.
Well, it's a big chess game, but unfortunately, lives are at stake in this, not little pieces on a chessboard. Luke Vargas at the Talk Media News at the United Nations, from his home, though, nearby. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. Take care.